Here's a question for you. How did Voltaire like his apples? Candied. Some of you found that funny. If you did, you're in for a literary treat as we review some books. If you didn't, you're still in for a literary treat as we review some books. Well, somehow June is over. We're actually well into July now, but I spent a fair portion of the beginning of the month away from my studio here at Fan Expo Denver, where I lectured with Rocky Mountain Paranormal to a standing room only crowd, which was typical of those events, but always a lot of fun. And if you want to know what I was lecturing about, well, the stories are conveniently located right here in my book of paranormal case files. Links where you can get signed copies, or any copies that you want, are down in the What's It. And in fact, so are links to all the books I'm going to be talking about in this review video. Anyway, I didn't read as much as usual last month, or rather, I did read as much, but it wasn't published books. It was references and manuscripts that people have sent me to review for Polymath Press, and things that I need to critique, and other assorted that sort of reading. So I didn't get through as many books, but I did manage to get through a few good ones. So let's go through our monthly book reviews. If you're new to my channel, this is one of the many things we do here. Every month I review all the books that I read the previous month. It's usually mostly horror or horror-related books, but longtime viewers know that I find myself tumbling down some rather weird literary rabbit holes. It happens. So let's just go ahead and check out the books I read this month, or I should say last month. First up for June was my attempt to keep alive the magic of hanging out with the Halloween people. So I started off with the Stoker Con 2024 San Diego Souvenir Anthology, since, of course, Stoker Con ended right at the beginning of the month. And in fact, if you want to know all about that, go check my backlog. I talked about the con and everything that happened therein in a previous video. As for this book, it includes short stories, articles, interviews, and some other things. And they're all either written by the guests of honor of the convention or somehow connected to the weekend's programming. And it was great to read through once I got home, because it did sort of help keep that magic alive for a little bit longer. Though now, of course, I have to wait a year until the next Stoker Con, which is going to be in Connecticut. C'est la vie. In terms of actually reviewing this book, I'm not really sure I know how to. For those of us who attended Stoker Con, it's a great souvenir and a great reminder of many of the people we met throughout the weekend. But for everyone else, it might not mean nearly as much, and that's assuming you can even get a copy. I'm not sure if it's actually available in bookstores or anywhere. I'm sure you could come across a copy if you really wanted to, but I don't know that it's been distributed outside of convention attendees. In terms of its contents, the stories and interviews range from the masterful to the not bad but not for me. But there's also a fair amount of what would essentially be filler if you were reading it not having attended the con. Things about the con itself, a welcome message. There are some policies about the con, who to talk to about different things, that kind of what would be filler material except for convention people. So if you weren't there, despite some good stories between these pages, it's honestly probably of little interest to you. However, if you're able to join us next year, you can get your own copy of the next anthology, and you'll understand why, even though the literary value is is mixed. Some of the stories are not for me. I'm not saying they're bad. They're just, some things are not for me, and it does have some filler. Despite all of that, I love these little books anyway, and if you attend the con, you'll be able to see why. The next one isn't particularly horror, or horror-related even, on its face. But for me, it's very horror-related, and I'll explain in a moment. It's this book by the late Father Gabriele Amorth, famous as an exorcist. The exorcist of Rome, in fact. So he was sort of... he became known as the Pope's exorcist, and in fact they made that movie starring Russell Crowe called The Pope's Exorcist about Father Amorth, even though Russell Crowe's Amorth and the real Amorth have nothing to do with one another. That's neither here nor there. This book is Father Amorth's book about another priest, Saint Padre Pio. The book is called Padre Pio, Stories and Memories of My Mentor and Friend. In case anyone doesn't know, I realize there are some Catholics among you and some non-Catholics who may be interested in religion and some people who have no interest whatsoever in religious ideas. So in case you don't know, Padre Pio was an Italian priest who became famous for a variety of supernatural claims about him and surrounding him. Most famously, he was said to bear the stigmata, or the supernatural manifestation of the wounds of Christ in his hands and in his side and that sort of thing. And he was said to bear those for most of his adult life. In addition to that, were claims that he could read souls in the confessional. On one occasion, somebody said he could levitate. There were prophecies that supposedly he made. He cast out demons and more and more and more. All these claims about him. And though the church was initially skeptical of his claims, in fact, they even restricted him in his priestly duties for a time, but they ultimately recognized him as a saint, and he's become one of the most popular saints among the faithful in current religious society. So that's who Padre Pio was, and that's a picture of him on the cover. This book is not a detailed biography, although it does cover the entire course of Padre Pio's life, but clearly it's short and it doesn't have space to be a detailed biography. Rather, it's more of what you would call a fond remembrance by a priest who spent a fair amount of time with the saint. If you're looking for a scholarly treatment of Pio's life, there are better books for you. That's doubly true if you're looking for a work that tries to balance faith and skepticism surrounding the claims made of Pio. You can find religious ones, you can find skeptical ones, you can find those that strike a balance between the two, and many of them have a lot to tell you about the details of Padre Pio's life. But, on the other hand, if you're looking for a sort of insider's perspective from somebody who was well acquainted with the Padre, this one would serve you well. Or if you're just looking for a short introduction rather than a more detailed scholarly treatment, this one would also serve you well. It's short enough to read in a single sitting, yet reasonably detailed on some matters, but it is more focused on Padre Pio's spirituality than on biographical details or a deep investigation into source material or skeptical analysis of the supernatural claims or theological analysis of the supernatural claims or any of that kind of thing. For me, it was a good reference. And I mentioned at the beginning of this review that even though it's not really a horror story, although, to be fair, Padre Pio was said to fight demons and did have, or at least was supposed to have, the stigmata, both of which could be said to be fairly horrifying. But at the beginning I said that even though this was not a horror story, my purpose in reading it was related to horror. And that's because a chapter in the upcoming second volume of this Case Files of the Rocky Mountain Paranormal Research Society series, there's a chapter toward the end of that second volume related to a first-class relic of St. Padre Pio. I'm not going to spoil my own book here, it's coming out soon, but if you happen to be interested in supernatural claims surrounding religion or religious history generally, you're not going to want to miss that one. But of course, if you just want our usual stories of ghosts and aliens, there's plenty of those in Volume 2 as well. Anyway, getting back to this, I read this book as part of my research, getting some background on Padre Pio to fill in some gaps in my knowledge for that chapter. So that's how, even though it has nothing to do with horror on its face, it connects to spooky stuff for me. I'm the kind of guy that apparently can turn anything spooky, and that's the way I like it. The next one is another nonfiction book, but it is more directly related to horror. And that's this Encyclopedia of Urban Legends by Jan Harold Brunvand. And of course, we all know that urban legends often deal with horrifying things. Let me just pick a random example. I'll flip to a random page, pick a random example, and make the case that we're talking about some horrifying stuff. So if I flip it open randomly, I land on a chapter about La Llorona, the weeping woman, the ghostly weeping woman of Mexican and I think maybe South American as well, but particularly Mexican lore. As you can see, this is a fairly hefty tome, though it's not the kind of book most people will want to read straight through cover to cover. I did so because I'm that kind of guy, and it can be enjoyed that way, but it seems to be intended more as a sort of desk reference for anyone interested in urban legends and folklore. The kind of thing that you keep at hand, and when an urban legend comes up, it's in here and it's cataloged for you. And it gives you some background about the legend. Or if you're maybe a horror writer or a screenwriter or something like that, and you're looking for inspiration, this might be the kind of book that you randomly flip to a page and it gives you not something that you would want to take directly and try to rip off the urban legend, but the kind of thing that might get the little mental gears turning or stimulate the little gray cells, as Poirot would say, and just give you some inspiration. On the positive side, this is, I think, the most comprehensive catalog of tons of distinct urban legends that I've ever come across. If you've heard one of these tall tales, there's a very good chance that either the story you heard or at least a variation thereof is listed somewhere in these pages. And it's written both with respect for its subject and a twinkle in the eye. That is, the author clearly takes the study of urban legends seriously. He's devoted his life to it, and he's written a serious work about it. But he doesn't expect the reader to suspend disbelief and take the stories themselves too seriously, nor does he expect the reader to adopt a purely scholarly attitude. The stories are here, and there's some scholarship, but the stories are meant to be read sort of on their own level. Not to be believed, because most of these are not believable stories, but to be enjoyed. However, and I mentioned a second ago there is some scholarship in here, but if you're looking for a lot of serious academic scholarship on the urban legends, this isn't going to be the best book for that. It does have a few more scholarly entries throughout, particularly entries or chapters that deal with the urban legends of a particular nation, so you can sort of see the different cultural trends in them. And it opens with a more academic introduction, but it doesn't go into great detail on the history of most of the legends themselves, doesn't really track their development over time, and doesn't go too deeply into explanations of why certain legends propagate more rapidly than others. So if you're a connoisseur of urban legends, if you're looking for a book on urban legends, whether this is the book for you or not depends on your particular purpose in reading it. If you want a comprehensive catalog of urban legends, this is probably as close to complete as any book could ever hope to be. But on the other hand, if you want to understand the legends on a deeper level, this is going to provide only a brief introduction, and you'll need to do a fair amount of follow-up reading. And there aren't a ton of references. There's a bibliography at the end, but there aren't a ton of references in each entry that will sort of point you along the way. So you'll have to do further reading, and you'll have to find a lot of those sources for yourself. Still a very good book. It's highly recommended. It just depends on why you're reading it. And finally, returning to horror fiction, we turn our attention to The Silence by Tim Lebbon. This is the horror novel everyone compares to A Quiet Place, and the novel upon which the Netflix movie The Silence is based. In fact, I recently made an entire video comparing this book to those two films, The Silence and A Quiet Place, and I've also reviewed the new Quiet Place Day One. So I'm going to be brief here, because if you want a more detailed review, you can go and check out that previous video that I made where I talk about the book in a fair amount of depth. But since I did reread the book while preparing for that video, I read it in June, so it gets cataloged in this review video along with the others. The bottom line, in case you want my opinion without checking out that video, is that this is the best version of that story out of all of the three. There are advantages to the movie version of The Silence. There are advantages to A Quiet Place. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. But this is the one that has what I really like. The characters are compelling. The prose is tight. It reads well. It's exciting. It's engaging. All those things. But most importantly, and I did talk about this in my review comparison video as well, it takes its time, not to bore us with minute details or anything, but it takes its time to show us how the world transforms as these sound-seeking monsters, Vesps they're called in this one, as they begin to emerge from their cave and take over the world. We're not left to wonder how people are going to adapt or how people did adapt in the past. It's all right here. And that's what I really liked about it, because yes, I'm a nerd, so of course I was interested in thinking about things like population dynamics and feeding patterns and Darwinian adaptation. I didn't get a degree in biology for nothing, I'm just saying. So, and no, you don't need to be able to solve differential equations to understand this book. You don't need a degree in biology. It's not a science-heavy book, but for somebody who has studied those things, it rings true, and I like watching as the characters get that information and discover along with us how the monsters work. So yeah, read the book. Even if you've seen one or both of the movies or any of the Quiet Place sequels, even if you've seen some or all of those, reading the book is well worth your time. But unfortunately, that's the end of my reading for this June. I'm hoping July will treat me to some more literary goodies. And of course, I'm already well underway in my monthly reading for July, so stay tuned, good things are coming. June, it just went way too fast, and when I wasn't out of the house doing various conventions and things, I ended up spending most of my time working, both on my own manuscript, as I said, reminder, volume 2 coming soon, or working on some other things for Polymath Press and a variety of other projects. So let's say don't be alarmed by my dwindling reading numbers this month. They'll pick back up soon, presumably in July, and there are good reasons why this was sort of a light month for me, so hopefully you can forgive me because good things are coming. But that brings us to the very end of another video. Do be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring my bell, tell all your friends about the wonderful things we're doing on this channel. And until next time, as always, take care and stay scared.